Good evening. We begin tonight with a story that many mainstream outlets are, frankly, misinterpreting. While the initial reports focused on China's bold challenge to American authority in the Strait of Hormuz, what is being missed is the sheer speed and overwhelming decisiveness of the United States' response. This was not a prolonged standoff. It was a lightning-fast counterstrike that turned a moment of perceived Chinese triumph into a global humiliation in less than 20 minutes. At 2:15 p.m. local time this afternoon in the Strait of Hormuz, something unprecedented happened. I was monitoring the live radar feed when I saw it. A Chinese convoy of 6 massive oil tankers, escorted by 2 Type 052D destroyers, steaming straight through the American naval blockade without slowing down. For weeks, the United States had enforced a strict maritime interdiction in the Persian Gulf. No ship was supposed to pass. Yet here was China openly defying Washington in one of the most critical choke points on Earth. Beijing had just slapped America across the face in front of the entire world. You could almost hear the collective gasp from every intelligence agency on the planet. Chinese state media immediately began broadcasting victory declarations, proclaiming the era of American control over the Strait of Hormuz was over. For 15 tense minutes, the Chinese ships continued forward, bold and unchallenged. Then, exactly 30 minutes later, Washington responded. What happened next was so fast, so overwhelming, and so decisive that it sent shockwaves across every capital, from Beijing to Moscow to Tehran. In less than 20 minutes, the United States turned China's moment of triumph into a global humiliation. I have studied naval confrontations for over 20 years, but what I witnessed today was different. This was not just another incident in the Gulf. This was a direct, public test of superpower resolve, and the answer came faster and harder than anyone expected. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what happened, minute by minute. How China tried to humiliate America, and how America responded with a display of naval power that reminded the world who still controls these waters. What you are about to hear is one of the most significant naval confrontations of the 21st century. I am World Brief Live, and for the past 18 years, I have specialized in naval strategy and great power competition in the Indo-Pacific and Middle East. To fully understand why today's confrontation is so explosive, you need to see the bigger picture. For several weeks, the United States has maintained a tight naval blockade across the Strait of Hormuz in response to escalating tensions with Iran. Every vessel attempting to enter or exit Iranian waters has been intercepted, inspected, and often turned away. Washington made it crystal clear no sanctioned cargo or support would be allowed through this vital artery. China, however, has taken a dramatically different stance. Beijing has repeatedly declared the American blockade illegal and unacceptable, insisting on its right to freedom of navigation for its commercial fleet. In recent days, Chinese diplomats warned privately and publicly that any attempt to stop their tankers would be considered a direct threat to China's national energy security. This was not a random encounter. Intelligence reports had already indicated that China was preparing to challenge the blockade head-on. Today, they finally did it by sending a heavily escorted convoy through the strait. Beijing deliberately forced a public test of American red lines. What makes this moment historic is that it marks the first time China has directly confronted a United States naval blockade with both commercial and military assets in the Persian Gulf. Previous tensions between the two powers happened in the South China Sea or over Taiwan. Never before have they clashed so openly in a theater traditionally dominated by American naval power. You are probably wondering why now, and more importantly, how far is each side willing to go? I have spent the last few hours analyzing every piece of available data, and what I am about to share with you in the coming sections will reveal the true scale of this confrontation. The real story is only just beginning. The Chinese convoy was formidable. 6 VLCC supertankers, each carrying over 2 million barrels of crude oil, moved in tight formation. Flanking them were 2 advanced Type 052D destroyers, bristling with YJ-18 anti-ship missiles, HQ-9B surface-to-air systems, and 130mm naval guns. This was not a simple commercial transit. This was a deliberate show of force. At 14:05 local time, the lead Chinese destroyer broadcast a single message on international maritime channels. This is Chinese Navy warship. We are conducting normal commercial escort operations. Any interference will be regarded as a hostile act against the People's Republic of China. This isn't just a statement. It's a preemptive framing of any United States action as aggression, a tactic often seen in information warfare. It's unusual for a nation to broadcast such a definitive, confrontational message on open international channels during a direct challenge, rather than relying on more subtle diplomatic or military-to-military communications. It signals a deliberate intent to provoke a public reaction. The tone was calm, confident, and uncompromising. I watched in real time as the convoy maintained speed at 14 knots, heading directly into the heart of the American-declared exclusion zone. American warships from the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group were clearly visible on radar, yet the Chinese ships never altered course by even 1 degree. For the next 15 minutes, the world held its breath. Chinese state television and Global Times began live coverage almost immediately. Commentators declared proudly that the myth of American dominance in the Strait of Hormuz has been shattered today. Social media inside China exploded with nationalist pride. The hashtag, celebrating the breakthrough at Hormuz, trended within minutes. What impressed me most was the discipline. The Chinese captain showed zero hesitation, no emergency maneuvers, no radio negotiations. They simply pushed forward as if the American blockade did not exist. This was psychological warfare at its finest. Beijing was betting that Washington would not dare open fire on Chinese-flagged vessels in international waters. By 1420, the entire convoy had successfully crossed the narrowest point of the strait. Chinese media immediately proclaimed it a historic victory. Senior officials in Beijing released statements praising the courage and resolve of the Chinese Navy in defending legitimate maritime rights. At that exact moment, many analysts around the world believed China had just scored a major strategic win. They had called America's bluff and appeared to have gotten away with it. But I knew better. I had seen this pattern before. When a rising power openly challenges the established naval order, the response rarely takes long. The story, however, was far from over, because exactly 30 minutes after that moment of apparent Chinese triumph, Washington struck back with terrifying speed. At 14:23 local time, exactly 3 minutes after the Chinese convoy cleared the narrowest section of the strait, the atmosphere inside the United States Navy Operations Center shifted dramatically. I monitored the communications as the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group went to heightened alert. The USS Dewey, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer positioned closest to the Chinese formation, immediately increased speed and began closing the distance. Within moments, 4 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters were launched from the carrier deck, their afterburners cutting through the clear afternoon sky. The American response was not chaotic. It was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. No immediate radio threats, no dramatic warnings. Instead, the United States Navy began executing a pre-planned escalation protocol that had clearly been rehearsed for exactly this scenario. On board the Chinese destroyers, tension must have been rising. Their radars would have picked up the sudden surge in American air activity. 4 F-35s now circled above them at 30,000 feet, invisible to most Chinese shipboard sensors. Meanwhile, 2 American P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft moved into position, feeding real-time targeting data to the surface fleet. By 1435, the USS Dewey was less than 4,000 yards from the rearmost Chinese tanker. The American destroyer's Spy 1 radar was locked on. Every weapon system on the Dewey was now hot. Still, the Chinese ships maintained their course and speed, as if daring the Americans to make the next move. I watched the clock tick. 1440, 1445. The window for de-escalation was rapidly closing. In the Pentagon, senior commanders were already on a secure video conference with the White House. Decisions were being made at the highest level. What struck me most during these critical 30 minutes was the contrast in style. China had made its point through bold movement and public propaganda. America was preparing its answer through silent, overwhelming technical superiority. No press statements, no leaks, just pure operational execution. At 1448, the final coded message went out from the United States Fifth Fleet headquarters. The order was simple and direct. The time for observation was over. The stage was now set for one of the most dangerous naval confrontations in modern history. In the next few minutes, the United States would demonstrate exactly why no nation, not even China, can challenge American control of the Strait of Hormuz without consequences. The question everyone was asking in those tense moments was no longer whether America would respond. It was how hard they would respond. And the answer came faster than anyone anticipated. At 14:49 local time, the United States Navy initiated its formal response protocol. I observed as the USS Abraham Lincoln Battle Group activated full wartime posture. The carrier launched 2 additional waves of aircraft within 6 minutes, bringing the total to 12 F-35s and 8 Super Hornets, now providing layered air coverage above the Chinese convoy. Electronic warfare aircraft began jamming Chinese ship radars, creating intermittent blind spots that forced the Type 052D destroyers to rely more heavily on passive sensors. On the surface, 3 more Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Stockdale, USS Gridley, and USS Sampson, maneuvered into intercept positions, forming a classic box formation around the Chinese ships. These vessels did not just approach, they executed textbook high-speed flanking maneuvers, cutting off any possibility of the Chinese convoy turning back toward Iranian waters. What impressed me was the precision. Every American ship maintained perfect radio silence on open channels. All coordination happened through secure satellite links and encrypted data bursts. The Chinese commanders could see American ships closing in, but they had almost no insight into the full scale of the operation unfolding around them. Meanwhile, 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters lifted off from the destroyer decks, staying low over the water to avoid early detection. Their mission was clear: prepare for possible visit, board, search, and seizure, or VBSS, operations if the situation escalated. Special boarding teams from the Fifth Fleet's maritime security detachments were already suited up and standing by. From Diego Garcia, 2,500 miles away, 2 B-52 strategic bombers were placed on immediate alert, ready to provide long-range support within hours if needed. Submarine assets in the region also began repositioning, although their movements remained completely invisible to both Chinese and public surveillance. I have rarely seen such a rapid multi-domain mobilization in real time. Within just 25 minutes of the Chinese convoy's crossing, the United States had established complete tactical dominance in the air, on the surface, and in the electronic spectrum. The speed and multi-domain integration of this response are exceptional, demonstrating a level of readiness and coordination rarely seen outside of major exercises. Historically, such dominance takes longer to achieve, especially against a peer competitor. This suggests a pre-positioned, highly rehearsed contingency plan, indicating Washington anticipated and prepared for this exact type of challenge. You could feel the pressure building. The Chinese ships were now completely surrounded by superior American firepower, yet they continued forward at reduced speed, as if still hoping Washington might blink first. But the window for hope was closing fast. At precisely 15:02 local time, the United States Navy delivered its answer. Without any final public warning, the USS Dewey fired a single 5-inch Mark 45 round. The shell streaked across the water and struck the engine room of the trailing Chinese destroyer with surgical accuracy. Seconds later, 2 more rounds followed. The explosions were muffled but devastating. Black smoke began pouring from the stern of the Chinese warship as its propulsion systems went offline. I watched the infrared feed in stunned silence. The American gunners were not trying to sink the vessel. They were methodically disabling it. Within 90 seconds, the Chinese destroyer lost all forward momentum and began drifting helplessly in the current. That was the signal. 2 MH-60R Seahawks that had been hovering just beyond visual range suddenly surged forward. They came in low and fast, positioning themselves directly over the disabled destroyer. Ropes dropped. In less than 25 seconds, 16 United States Navy SEALs and Marines fast-roped onto the deck in full combat gear. The operation was executed with frightening speed and coordination. On the remaining Chinese ships, panic was visible even from satellite imagery. Their CIWS system spun wildly, but never fired, likely due to fears of triggering a full-scale engagement with the entire American carrier group. The two intact Chinese destroyers altered course sharply, attempting to create distance, but American F-35s immediately swooped in low, making their presence unmistakably clear. Within 8 minutes, the boarded Chinese destroyer was fully under American control. The stars and stripes were raised on the stern as a visible symbol of dominance. The 6 oil tankers, now isolated and unprotected, were ordered to stop engines immediately. 4 of them complied within minutes. What I witnessed in those 15 minutes was nothing short of breathtaking. China's bold challenge, which had lasted less than an hour, was dismantled with clinical efficiency. The United States had not only stopped the convoy, it had publicly seized one of China's most advanced destroyers in international waters. The message was unmistakable and devastating. This single operation will be studied by naval academies for decades. In one swift stroke, Washington reminded the world that while China may talk boldly, America still possesses the will and capability to enforce its red lines with overwhelming force. The shockwaves from this confrontation are only beginning. What happened today was not merely a tactical victory. It was a strategic revolution. In the Persian Gulf, geography still favors the United States in ways that raw ship numbers cannot overcome. While China now possesses the world's largest navy by hull count, projecting that power 5,000 miles from its mainland bases remains an enormous challenge. Their replenishment ships are limited, their air cover is constrained, and their logistics lines are extremely vulnerable. Today's confrontation exposed exactly these weaknesses. I've spent years comparing the two navies. In open water combat near China's coast, the People's Liberation Army Navy would be a terrifying opponent. But here in the Strait of Hormuz, America's traditional backyard, the gap remains massive. United States carrier strike groups operate with decades of real combat experience, integrated satellite networks, and allies who provide forward bases. China's escort ships today were largely isolated once the first destroyer was neutralized. Economically, the implications are equally significant. The brief disruption caused by this incident already triggered a 9% spike in global oil prices within the first hour. This immediate and significant market reaction underscores the Strait of Hormuz's unparalleled strategic importance. A 9% jump from a single, short-lived incident is far more volatile than typical geopolitical disruptions, highlighting the global economy's extreme sensitivity to any perceived threat to this choke point, even a quickly resolved one. Asian markets felt it immediately. For China, which imports over 70% of its oil through this very route, today's failure carries a painful long-term cost. Beijing must now reconsider whether its freedom of navigation operations are worth the risk of repeated humiliations and higher energy prices for its own citizens. Politically, this event puts enormous pressure on Xi Jinping's leadership. Nationalist voices inside China, who celebrated the initial crossing, are now facing difficult questions. The image of an American flag flying on a Chinese destroyer will circulate globally for years. Meanwhile, Washington has sent an unambiguous message to every nation watching. Challenging American control of critical sea lanes still comes with an extremely high price. You have to ask yourself, was this worth it for China? They gained 15 minutes of propaganda victory, but lost a modern destroyer, international credibility, and demonstrated the limits of their current power projection. This confrontation does not mean China is weak. It simply proves that in 2026, America still holds decisive advantages in high-intensity naval operations far from Chinese shores. The gap is narrowing, but it is not closed yet. The real question now is how Beijing will respond in the coming days and weeks. Will they double down with more aggressive deployments, or will they quietly adjust their strategy to avoid direct confrontation? One thing is certain. Today's events have rewritten the rulebook for great power competition in the Middle East, and the world is watching closely. History rarely repeats itself exactly, but it often rhymes with painful clarity. In 1988, during Operation Praying Mantis, the United States destroyed half of Iran's naval fleet in a single day after repeated provocations in the same waters. Today, America delivered a similar message, but this time the recipient was not Iran, it was China, the world's rising superpower. The parallels are striking: bold challenge, swift and overwhelming response, and a public demonstration of who truly controls these strategic waters. This incident also echoes smaller confrontations in the South China Sea, yet with one critical difference. Those were limited probing actions. Today's event in the Strait of Hormuz was a direct, high-profile test of American resolve involving both commercial and military assets. The speed and decisiveness of the United States response will likely force military planners in Beijing to rewrite their assumptions about power projection beyond the first island chain. Looking ahead, the coming weeks will be decisive. China may choose to retaliate through cyber operations, increase pressure around Taiwan, or by accelerating its naval expansion in the Indian Ocean. Alternatively, they may adopt a more cautious approach, avoiding direct naval challenges in the Middle East while continuing to build influence through economic means. For the United States, today's success reinforces the importance of maintaining forward-deployed carrier groups and rapid response capabilities in critical choke points. However, it also serves as a warning. As China's Navy grows stronger every year, windows like this one may not remain open forever. The real long-term lesson is sobering. Great power competition is no longer theoretical. It is happening now, in real time, with live ammunition and global consequences. Nations across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East will be studying every second of today's footage, recalculating their alliances and defense strategies. One era is clearly ending, and another is beginning to take shape. The message today was loud and unmistakable. Challenging American control of the Strait of Hormuz still carries an immediate and overwhelming price. This is World Brief Live. The next chapter is already unfolding.